What if I told you your thoughts aren't really yours? That the way you react, the beliefs you hold most sacred, even the dreams you chase, might have been quietly placed there by someone else, smoothly, systematically, without you noticing? What if everything you think you are was shaped to keep you from ever asking the real questions? From an early age, you learned to hide what you felt and to echo what others wanted to hear, to smile through discomfort, to obey what made no sense to you. You were trained to fit in, but never to awaken. That training wore the mask of education, of values, of love, but it taught you to survive, not to see. We walk around thinking we're making choices, but we're often just enacting scripts passed down by invisible forces. Family, school, religion, media. Each has planted a voice inside you saying, be accepted, not authentic. Don't question, just perform. And so, you live your life with a subtle ache, quietly wondering, is this all there is? You adapted, you played the game. But deep down, you feel the fracture, that quiet space between who you are and who you pretend to be. And that gap, it hurts. Sometimes as restlessness, sometimes as a vague sadness, but always as a subtle echo inside that whispers, this isn't freedom. You've done what was expected, but not what was true. You have a life that looks stable, but a soul that keeps tossing in silence. And in the moments when no one's watching, you ask yourself why. Why you feel so far from who you are. Why, even when everything seems fine, something sacred feels missing. That question, that tiny crack in your routine, is the beginning. Because once you start to see clearly, you can't unsee. You can't go back to the sleep that once felt safe. Something in you has already begun to wake up. And though it may not yet have the words, it's yearning for something deeper, because it knows there's something more real waiting to be remembered. They didn't shackle you with chains. They conditioned you with affection. They shaped your behavior through rewards, through approval, through fear disguised as guidance. And you, without even noticing, began to surrender. You traded instinct for rules, wonder for discipline, truth for acceptance, and you called it growing up. They told you how to speak, how to behave, what to feel, and when to suppress it. You learned that doubt meant weakness, that crying made you fragile, that rebellion was shameful. And every time you broke an invisible rule, someone withdrew their love, their respect, or their presence. So you adapted, you pretended it didn't hurt. You convinced yourself that what you had was enough, that the suit fit. Even when it strangled your breath, you clapped for what you didn't believe in. You laughed when you felt numb. You became functional in a world that celebrates masks and punishes honesty. A world where being real is dangerous. And now you see it. Every time you whisper to yourself, why am I doing this? You're met with recycled answers. Because that's the way it is. Because it's what people do. Because it's expected. But in that echo, you realize most people are on autopilot, repeating opinions, routines, identities they never questioned. They sold you freedom as a set of pre-approved options. They called success a title, not a truth. They painted happiness as a finish line, not a presence. But none of that taught you to feel. You were raised to perform, not to understand, to compete, not to connect, to obey, not to awaken. You thought you were writing your own story, but you were just reading a script that was handed to you before you could even spell your name. And that script has unspoken rules. Be likable, be impressive, stay inside the lines, don't feel too deeply, don't ask too much, don't step out of frame, because if you do, you'll be corrected. Pop culture told you what to desire. Religion told you what to fear. Family taught you to avoid disappointing others. And so, trying to be loved, you left pieces of yourself scattered everywhere, until one day, you looked in the mirror and wondered if you were looking at yourself, or a well-trained avatar surviving on approval. But there's one thing they can't touch. The spark, that small, undomesticated part of you that refuses to die, that strange pull to break out, to feel real things again, to reclaim what was yours before the world taught you to fake it. That spark is not borrowed. It wasn't programmed. It's your signal. And if you listen, really listen, it can start everything over. It can rewrite the script, not by fighting the system, but by simply no longer believing it. That spark doesn't yell, it doesn't threaten, it just waits, quietly, until you're ready to remember who you were before you forgot. Take a brutally honest look at your life. How many of your choices were truly yours? And how many were just reactions to expectations you never dared to question? The career you chase, the way you love, the habits that structure your day, are they genuine decisions or rehearsed responses to invisible scripts? You wake up to the alarm, you rush through the day, you smile because you're supposed to, you work to survive, you rest because you're exhausted. Days blur together and still you keep moving as if motion equals meaning. But deep inside, something feels fractured. You produce, but don't feel. You succeed, but don't live. You repeat, but don't understand. And in the middle of all this noise, a quiet anxiety starts to take root. A kind of sadness with no clear name. It creeps in when everything should be fine. When you have the job, the relationship, the goals. And yet, a hollow echo rings beneath it all. It's not depression. It's disconnection. Not from the world, but from yourself. You post happy photos while your soul stays hidden. You make small talk, but crave silence. You meet deadlines, but long for meaning. You check off boxes, play your part, follow the rhythm. But each step feels heavier, more mechanical, further from your truth, and no one sees it, because you've learned to perform it well. We're all part of a grand performance, a collective stage where everyone plays their role, without realizing they've forgotten who they were before the act began. And you, slowly, quietly, became a character, one that dresses acceptably, speaks politely, avoids conflict, and earns approval. But behind the mask, there's a person quietly suffocating. You wonder why being yourself feels like a threat, why you feel a knot in your chest when you silence your truth, why you betray yourself just to avoid awkwardness or rejection. The answer is simple: because you were trained to do so. Every time you were honest, someone corrected you. Now fear keeps you polite, fear keeps you quiet. But there's a cost to pleasing others, the erosion of your soul. The price of blind obedience is living a life that doesn't belong to you. And what makes it worse is thinking it's the right thing to do, because no one ever taught you that there's another way, an inward path that doesn't revolve around approval or perfection. Can you see it now? Control doesn't need chains. It just needs you to be afraid of your own voice. And that fear takes over every time you doubt your gut, every time you choose silence over truth, every time you stay where it's safe instead of stepping into the unknown. But one honest question can break the cycle. Is what I'm doing born from awareness or fear? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, don't run from it. Thank it. That discomfort is the doorway. It means something inside you is still alive, something raw, something untouched, something waiting to be remembered. Krishnamurti didn't hand out formulas. He invited you to look, truly look, to witness reality without the filters of memory, identity, or conditioning. He said truth is a pathless land. No one can lead you to it. No system, no guru. Only your own raw attention can uncover it, by observing your mind with ruthless honesty. And that may sound poetic, but it's revolutionary. Because as long as you're trapped inside the machinery of thought, you're stuck in the past. Thinking is remembering. Thinking is comparing. Thinking is projecting. But it's not seeing. It's not understanding. It's not presence. And what you truly need right now is not more ideas. It's clarity. The you speak of, when you say, "This is just who I am," is a construct, a patchwork of memories, wounds, borrowed stories, and internalized expectations, a persona stitched together by time. But that's not you. That's the role your mind rehearses over and over until it forgets the actor underneath. Here's the paradox. Thought created your ego, and now the ego tries to control your thoughts. It's a mental tug of war where both sides are made of the same fabric, and as long as that battle continues, there can be no stillness, no space, no freedom, just a loop of craving and fear. Krishnamurti laid it out with brutal clarity. The ego is noise. Consciousness is silence. The ego chases answers. Consciousness simply sees. And the act of seeing, pure, unfiltered, without judgment, is the real revolution. Because when you see the false as false, it collapses. Not because you fight it, but because you no longer feed it with belief. You were conditioned to live in psychological time. One day I'll be better. When I succeed, I'll be happy. Once I have peace, I'll rest. But that timeline is a mirage. It keeps moving. It never delivers. It's the carrot in front of the donkey, and you're the donkey, running toward a promise that keeps shifting just out of reach. The freedom you long for doesn't live in the future. It lives in your willingness to see what's true now. Not what you wish were true, not what others want you to be, but what is raw, uncomfortable, sacred. And that kind of seeing only happens in stillness, in the gaps between reaction and reflection, in the silence beneath the noise. But seeing hurts, because to truly look means dismantling your certainties. It means facing the fact that what you believed yourself to be might be fiction, that your deepest truths were inherited, that your suffering isn't caused by life, but by your story about it. And that's not easy, because the ego resists extinction. It clings, it fights, but you are not your ego. You are the space in which the ego rises and falls. You are the awareness behind the fear, not the fear. You are the light that reveals the shadow, not the shadow itself. You are the stillness underneath the storm. And that stillness can't be bought, taught, or borrowed. It can only be remembered. And when you remember it, something shifts. Not out there, inside. You stop seeking. You start seeing. You stop chasing meaning. You begin inhabiting it. You become presence, alive attention, quiet lucidity. And that lucidity doesn't fix anything. It transforms everything simply by illuminating it. You don't need masters. You don't need doctrines. You just need to see yourself without the mask. And in that naked gaze, without guilt, without shame, without filters, your true awakening begins. Because in seeing what you are not, you finally come home to what you are. You don't need to burn down the system. You don't have to renounce your beliefs, cut ties with your family, or vanish into the forest. The shift doesn't happen outside. It begins within, in that quiet, decisive moment when you realize you no longer want to stay asleep. That moment doesn't come with thunder. It arrives in stillness. And once it's here, it doesn't leave. The real revolution doesn't scream. It starts when you stop echoing the noise, when you begin questioning the inner dialogue that used to run on autopilot, when you stare at fear, not to conquer it, but to breathe with it. That's courage. Not fighting, not fleeing, but staying present where you once collapsed. And that presence changes everything. Not because you fought your chains, but because you saw they weren't real. Because you finally realized your prison was an idea, a learned reflex, a shattered mirror where you mistook your reflection for your identity. But now, you're coming home. Not to the version of you the world constructed, but to the you that just is. You stop pleasing by default. You stop explaining your truth like an apology. You stop chasing approval like it's oxygen. And in that pause, you discover something radical. You don't need to be understood to be at peace, because peace isn't granted. It's claimed when you refuse to abandon yourself again. And that shift, it radiates, even if no one claps for it, even if the world remains blind to your quiet transformation. It shows in your gaze, in the way you breathe, in how you carry yourself. You're no longer reacting, you're choosing awareness over fear, presence over performance, stillness over noise. Sure, you'll slip, you'll fall back into old loops, but you'll rise with more clarity each time. And that clarity is your compass. It reminds you, you are not your impulses. You can pause, you can breathe, you can feel, and you can return to yourself. And that returning, that act of coming back home to your essence, is the most powerful practice you'll ever know. This is not about becoming perfect or enlightened. It's about being honest, about standing naked before your own truth and choosing to stay with everything, your shadows, your scars, your story, because the more light you carry inward, the less darkness can dominate you. This is your moment. You don't have to change the world. You just have to stop being molded by it. That is your rebellion, to live from within. And if you do, if you anchor yourself in your truth even as the world trembles, you'll realize something profound. Freedom is not a destination, it's a way of walking. Now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. You know, you feel it. There's a quiet clarity cutting through the noise, whispering, there's no turning back. Because when truth touches your awareness, it doesn't destroy you, it strips you bare. And once you've stood in that raw light, the illusion no longer fits. You walk the same streets, but everything looks different. You watch people act, laugh, chase time, and something in you knows, most are still asleep, but you're not. Because something ancient in you has awakened, a voice that can no longer be silenced, a pulse of presence that refuses to keep living someone else's life. This is not about escaping, not about quitting your job, moving to the mountains or burning bridges. It's about showing up, fully, about reclaiming your center, your axis, your inner compass. It's about daring to question every pattern, every reflex, every normal that no longer resonates. Because surface living no longer satisfies, autopilot no longer works, pretending is no longer possible. And when you fall again, and you will, don't punish yourself. Give thanks. Each fall is an invitation to wake up deeper, a reminder that you're learning to walk without the armor, that every conscious choice you make, even when everything shakes around you, breaks invisible chains you didn't even know were there. Let silence be your ally. Let the present moment become your sacred ground. Let yourself, your real self, be the only home you return to. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for applause. You don't need the world to approve your awakening. Because real freedom doesn't need to shout. It just radiates, and everything it touches transforms. Today, leave your mark. Declare your break. And if you're ready, type in the comments like a sacred act. I am not my thoughts. That sentence is fire. It's a doorway, a rebellion, a beginning. Write it for who you were, for who you're becoming. Write it so you never forget that part of you. No longer wants to stay asleep. And if something in this message shook you, if it gave words to what your soul has been whispering, don't walk away unchanged. Share it, not for numbers, but for resonance. Because when one soul wakes up, it becomes a torch, and that light helps others see in the dark. Subscribe, not as a habit, but as a declaration, a breadcrumb on your path, a signal that says, I'm awake, and I will no longer be a puppet of fear. You weren't born to perform. You came to remember, to break, to rebuild. And if you made it this far, it's because something in you already knows with a certainty that doesn't come from the mind, but from the soul. So rise. The revolution has already begun, and it begins with you.